السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Can you hear me clearly, Cham? Inshallah ta'ala, we'll take the ninth hadith from the 40 hadith of Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah. And these great hadith that are principles in the deen, that we would see that we always have to, we would need them at all times, especially when a person is concerned about matters of the deen and studying matters of the deen. Always have to refer things to principles, and that's why this is such an important book that the ulama always teach and keep on repeating teaching it. And it's one of the very basic books that every student of knowledge should start with. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless it for us and make us among those who learn and be among the knowledgeable ones. And as Ibn Sirin rahimahullah, he used to say that كان العلم في القلوب, that the ilm used to be in the hearts, referring to the companions radiallahu anhum. And the real knowledge is in the hearts. Why? Because it brings the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it changes one's life, and it makes a person more obedient to Allah. But then he said, ثُمَّ صَارَ فِي الثِّيَابِ, then the ilm then become in the clothing or in the outside appearance. And he meant by this that people become more concerned of the outside appearance more than their hearts in the subject of ilm, even in the context of teaching, for example. Ilm becomes the outside, meaning the talks, the sessions of knowledge, learning, gaining information, and all of that is important, of course, and that's how we gain knowledge. But this becomes the goal in itself, and not the goal is for the person to change his heart and to be more obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to increase one's fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from what we hear. This ninth hadith, as you see, the narrator is, as it says here, عن أبي هريرة عبد الرحمن ibn Sakhr radiallahu anhu قال. So the narrator is Abi Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and he mentioned his name, Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr radiallahu anhu. As we know that he was called, his nickname Abu Hurairah, referring to Al-Hirza, and Al-Hirza is the cat, Hurairah is the small cat, Tasghir Hirza. Then he was given that name because of he loved the cats, and there was a cat that would be with him, so he was called Abu Hurairah because of that. And the Prophet ﷺ gave him that when he saw him carrying a small cat in his sleeves. So he said, قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, I heard the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم saying, يقول ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم كثرة مسائلهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم رواه البخاري ومسلم. He heard the Prophet ﷺ saying, and then he mentioned these beautiful statements. He said, مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, what I forbade you from, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, that means stay away from it. We'll talk about the significance of that, inshallah. وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, and what I have ordered you to do of it to the best of your ability. فَإِنَّمَا أَهْلَكَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ, because indeed what destroyed the nations before you, كَثْرَةُ مَسَائِلِهِمْ, the many questioning or asking or making questions, وَاخْتِلَافُهُمْ عَلَى أَنْبِيَائِهِمْ, and differing against the prophets, opposing the messengers, disobeying them, and so on. So first of all, this hadith has munasabah, has a reason why the Prophet ﷺ said that. Where a man, after the Prophet ﷺ, he said, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَتَبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْحَجَّ فَحُجُّوا, O people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained upon you, made it an obligatory thing upon you to make hajj, therefore make hajj. So a man asked the Prophet ﷺ, أَفِي كُلِّ عَامٍ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ, is it every year, O Prophet of Allah? So the Prophet ﷺ didn't answer. So the man asked again, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't answer. And after the third time, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لو قلت نعم لوجبت, which means if I said yes, لوجبت becomes wajib, becomes mandatory. That means it will be mandatory every year. وَلَمَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, and you won't be able to fulfill that. Then he said عليه الصلاة والسلام, the statement ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه, what I forbade you from doing, then stay away from it. وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم, and when I have ordered you to do فأتوا منه ما استطعتم, bring or do of it the best of your ability, to the best of your ability. So and then the rest of the hadith. This hadith is a very important hadith because again it sets the principle of how to deal with the orders of the Prophet ﷺ and what the Prophet ﷺ forbade. The first of all, what is an-nahi? Ma nahaytukum, what I forbade you. Nahaytukum, nahayt, he's talking about himself ﷺ, and then the kaf refers to you addressing the people in the plural tense. So it comes from al-kaf, an-nahi. And basically an-nahi is to ask to stay away of something. And that's, as the ulama they say, على وجه الاستعلاء, meaning that the one that is asking you or ordering you to stay away from something, he is above you, right? That comes, the word nahi comes in place. Like for example, a child, if he tells his parents, for example, don't feed me, rice, for example, he is not giving them nahi because he is less than them. The nahi comes when someone is above, like a parent saying to his child, don't you dare do this. That's nahi. This is then the word nahi becomes in the right context. And the Prophet ﷺ, of course, he is above all of us, meaning he has authority over us. And of course, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above all because the authority is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's an important thing to understand, that the authority of the Prophet ﷺ over us in our selves, in our wealth, in everything. And the part of the covenant of an iman to say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, is that the person makes the Prophet ﷺ's authority over oneself and one's wealth more than anyone else. If the Prophet ﷺ ordered the believers to give their life, they will give their life. If the Prophet ﷺ ordered the believers to give all of their wealth, they will give their wealth. Anything that he would order them to do, they see the Prophet ﷺ as the one that has the authority, with, of course, the love of Allah and the love of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then it becomes the way that people deal then with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, with the orders of the Prophet ﷺ, with the things that he forbids, is just a matter of submission, just to get to know what it means, and they submit themselves because that's what the authority of the Prophet ﷺ over our own wealth and health and relationships and so on and so forth. So that's an important meaning to understand the word ma nahaytukum, and that comes with, of course, the great wisdom and the love and so on. So ma nahaytukum anhu, what I forbade you from doing, fajtanibu. Fajtanibu. Ijtanibu, that means stay away from it. And staying away from it is more than just not to do it. And ijtinabu shay, when you make that ijtinab of something, that means you, as they say, ibta'ada anhu, a person would go away from it. Or for example, a person, they use the same word to al-ihtiraz min al-shay, to protect yourself, to shield yourself from that thing that you're ordered to make ijtinab from. So shielding oneself, having a barrier between a person and what he has been ordered to make ijtinab of. So this is basically as if it's a condition. If I forbade you from something, then stay away from it. Stay away from it. And as we heard before, the hadith about the shubuhat, even the doubtful matters that is not clear to many people, what's the ruling of it is to stay away from it. Why? Because فَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. Whoever falls into the doubtful matters, he would fall into the haram. So therefore, there is no way, as the other hadith mentioned, there is no way a person would protect himself from the haram and he doesn't leave a space of halal. So there's some halal has to be not to be done for the person to protect himself from falling into the haram. It's not to forbid the halal, but in many cases, a person has to stay away from some halal, and the meanings of which is very obvious. Like if there's a place where, as we said, for example, people they want to swim in the lake, in the ocean or whatever, in the middle of a summer day. Right? This is halal in itself, in principle. But people would be, so many would go in these days, and they're not observing what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala wants from them. So the believers, then it is not permissible for them to go in such mixing to protect their religion. So therefore they have to leave some of the halal, like for example driving to that place, being in that spot, in that neighborhood, things like this that would lead them to go to that place. So that means staying away from the haram necessitates that a person will stay away from some of the halal that would take, for example, the person closer to the haram. And of course, that needs knowledge, of course. So fajtanibu, that means stay away from it. That means you are in one place and the haram is in another place. And that's the fiqh, that's the understanding of staying away from the haram or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade or what the Prophet ﷺ forbade. Then what is left is to know, is to have the knowledge of what we have been ordered to forbid ourselves on or to stay away from. So for example, if the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from backbiting, and that's in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, then the person stays away from it. And not to indulge in it, not to hear it, not to be present in a gathering where they commit the sin of backbiting, and so on and so forth. So, مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوا, what I forbade you from, فَاجْتَنِبُوا. This is in general principle. What did the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from? Then this is the details of that is to be learned, one thing after the other. And knowingly that the Prophet ﷺ would not forbid from his own self, he forbid from revelation from Allah. Knowing that the Prophet ﷺ, if he forbade us of something, he forbade us from something that is harmful for us, something that is wicked, something that is evil, even if it sounds or it looks or it might taste good, but if it's something that the Prophet ﷺ forbade, that means is evil, something that is bad, something that would brings all kinds of bad things for one's worldly life and the hereafter also. So that means the person should deal with it, whether he knows the wisdom behind it or not, he would stay away from it. So here the order is, and we have to be careful with the words and what it means. So if it's a nahi, if it's something haram or something that is forbidden, and there's rulings with that, of course, that an-nahi yaqtadi at-tahrim. If the Prophet ﷺ said, do not do this, that's nahi. That means it's haram. Unless there's something that would take the haram to make it makruh, for example, and still a person should stay away from it, unless there is a need for it, meaning in the makruh, not in the haram. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوا. The importance of understanding the words. So what is the ruling with what we have been forbidden from doing is al-ijtinab. Al-ijtinab is to stay away from it. Not to, there is no statement afterwards that says to the best of your ability. Staying away from it, that means you stay away from it. Why? Because al-manhiyat is a negative action. That means you don't do anything. You just stay away from something. So if that's the case, then that means there's no excuse for someone to say, well, I could not help it, but to do it. Unless a person is forced by some force or something, but in general, a person is forbidden from going to a bar, for example. So if he says, that requires for a person to wear his clothes and to go outside of his house and to drive his car and to, something like this. So where is the way of or saying that to the best of one's ability, because he's ordered to stay away from all of that. That means it's easier in a sense that he is ordered to not to do certain actions, physical actions. So if he does it, that means there's no excuse whatsoever. So فاجتنبوا. So and that's why also if the person is in haram and he get to know that this matter is haram, there's no such a thing as leave it in gradual way and form. Just leave it. You leave it and you seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If a person, because it was so much, difficult for him and he falls again into the sin, he repents again, but he should leave it immediately and not to take the matter in a gradual way and form, thinking that this is something permissible. And then the second statement, وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. And whatever I ordered you to do, مَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ. Al-amr is to be ordered to do something, and that also comes from an authority. So the amr, the verb can be فعل amr, but it doesn't mean that a person is ordering in a state of authority. Like for example, if you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you would use فعل amr, you would use the verb of ordering. You would say اللهم اغفر لي. اغفر لي. اغفر لي, that means forgive me. But is it, so it's from someone that is above? Of course not. This is not an amr, this is not an order, but rather this is seeking the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making dua and so on. But if it comes from above, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala order the human being to do something, that's authority. That's that means people need to submit themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. So the Prophet ﷺ here, when he mentioned the order, he didn't say وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ or فَأْتُوا بِهِ or do it, but rather he said فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ, take from it or do from it مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, what's in your istita'a, what's in your capacity, what's in your ability. That's a very precise statement, and it shows that the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, how is it wahi from Allah, revelation from Allah. You won't find faults in the statements of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying what I have ordered you to do. And the orders, that means that it requires actions. It requires physical actions and things of that nature. But people are different from one another. Some people, they have the ability. Some people, they don't have the ability. So what do they do if they don't have the ability? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give them the ability to do something, like going for Hajj. For example, لِمَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا. They don't have the money to go for Hajj. Then Hajj is not mandatory for them, even though they have been ordered to. That's what the context of the question here. Hajj requires a person to have a certain health level. A person doesn't have it, he's not able to sit in a plane or in a car or in an animal or anything. That means it is not mandatory for him. And the same thing with even the specific orders, that a person can do some of it, but he's not able to do it in the most perfect way. Then he should do the best of his ability in whatever he can, and whatever he cannot, then he is excused and relieved from it, which is another meaning of it. That means we are ordered to establish the salah, 5 daily salah. So there is no excuse in this unless a person is in a coma, for example. So if a person is not able to stand, then he sits. If he's not able to sit, then he lays down. If he's not able to move his head while laying down, then he moves his eyes. If he's not able to move his eyes, then with his heart. So there's no, as long as he's awake, as long as he's alive, then he has to make the salah. So, but أَفَأْتُ مِنْهُ مَسْتَطَعْتُمْ, according to the best of one's ability. And the same thing, if a person is not able to stand in a plane, for example, then we use this hadith. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ also مَسْتَطَعْتُمْ. You fear Allah to the best of your ability. You've not been able to stand, for example, then you pray sitting, and so on and so forth. The order is to be applied in the most perfect way. If a person is not able to, then he goes to whatever capacity. And then istita'a it means that once a person do more, he's not going to be able to. So it's the best of one's ability to get one's self to exert the most means and not to be relaxed in the matter or to belittle the orders of Allah and things like this. And that also includes, as the ulama, they say, the recommended acts of worship. The recommended acts of worship. And not to say, well, it's recommended, I don't have to do it. But rather, if a person is receiving an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do something recommended, he still should do the best he can to do it. But if he leaves it, there's no sin, of course. But as Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, he said, "Man dawama ala tark sunan," whoever is consistently leaving the sunnah, leaving the recommended acts, kana naqsan fi dini, this is a deficiency in his religion. This is weakness in the person if he's consistent in leaving the sunnah, even the recommended acts. And he said, فَإِنْ كَانَ تَرْكُهَا تَهَوُّنًا بِهَا, if he left the sunnah, the recommended acts, تَهَوُّنًا, that means he doesn't care, belittling it. وَرَغْبَةً عَنْهَا, seeking something else. He belittled it in his heart, he doesn't need it, or something of that nature. كَانَ ذَلِكَ فِسْقًا, this becomes fisq, rebellious, disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يعني لورود الوعيد عليه, because there's a wa'id, there's a warning against this. حيث قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, since the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, من رغب عن سنتي فليس مني, whoever turns away from my sunnah, seeks something else other than my way, he is not one of me. So this is how even they saw. Oh subhanallah. طيب إن شاء الله. We'll finish right away إن شاء الله. So فأتوا منه ما استطعتم. So do the best you can, to the best of ability. And maybe inshallah we can move the lectures earlier inshallah ta'ala before, because of the Maghrib Salah. So go ahead inshallah if you have to make it for the Salah. I will just read the last statement. فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم, what destroyed those who before you, and those who before you, like maybe the Jews and the Christians, or the nations before in general. The nations before, what is it? كثرة مسائلهم, they ask so many questions. And we see that in the Quran by the people of Bani Israel, when they have been ordered to slaughter a cow, and they kept on asking, what is it, what's its color, what does it do, and so on. So they ask so many questions to the prophets, and then they don't obey them or submit themselves to them, but rather they differ among themselves, they don't fulfill the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. So واختلافهم على أنبيائهم. So they have been ordered to ask why the Prophet ﷺ is been revealed to him. After the Prophet ﷺ turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then a person should ask. And a person, whenever he asks, he should not make up questions. As the ulama, they forbid these made up questions that has no reality to it, but rather to ask about how to do things. This is definitely part of the deen. As also Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, or the Imam Malik, when a man came to him and he asked him many questions, and he said, Allah A'lam. Ibn Umar, when a man from Yemen came to him and he kept to ask him, and he asked him a question about matters of Hajj. He gave him the answer. He said, أرأيت إن كان كذا, أرأيت إن منعت. If you see if I have been forbidden, see if I have making up situations. He said, اجعل أرأيت في اليمن, leave أرأيت in Yemen. Just ask a question and then do not make up things. If it happens, then ask, but do not make up masail. As many even of the books, they would have made up masail, made up questions that has no reality to it. That makes people differ against their messengers and so on. I'll stop here inshallah ta'ala at this point, and maybe we can refer back to the hadith inshallah next time. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.